Welcome back. Now we start the program in earnest, and we're going to be looking at the 2014 World Economic Forum. It is the 44th forum, and for the first time it will be hosted by Nigeria. Is this a sign of Nigeria's growing economic and political importance on the African continent? Well, that is a question we shall be looking to answer in this part of today's program. And you remember we mentioned Davos a short while ago. This whole World Economic Forum has the same aims as that economic forum which the whole world attends every year in Switzerland. Now, to shed more light on this for us this morning, it's my pleasure to welcome the Chief Executive Officer of Africa Finance Corporation, Mr. Andrew Alli.
Hello. Morning. Good morning.
As well as the country's senior partner of PricewaterhouseCoopers, Mr. Ken Igbokwe.
Morning.
Good morning, and thank you very much for coming. Now, we keep hearing about the World Economic Forum, and every year our president, whoever it is, goes to Davos to discuss economics, and we see all these eggheads on television. Now, what is this all about?
Okay, thank you. The World Economic Forum is a global gathering of leaders, business leaders, political leaders, social leaders, where they come together each year to discuss various topical matters. The World Economic Forum started in the early 1970s. With a gathering of European business leaders in Davos, or in
early 70s.
In the early 1970s, yes.
Okay.
And I think in those days it was called something like the European Business Forum. In the 1980s it became more global and became the World Economic Forum. And what happens is that each year in Davos, around this time, there is a global gathering, as you said, but there are also regional gatherings. So there's one in Africa, there's one in Asia, there's one in the Middle East as well. And essentially these are just fora. No. They're just, the regional ones focus on issues and
issues.
Yes, exactly, issues that relate to those particular regions.
Okay, so are these outcomes then taken to the main event in Davos?
No, so they can just develop from, they can just be taken on from the particular regional meeting and implemented.
Okay.
So, for example, things like the Feed Africa program, which is around agriculture, came out of one of the previous African World Economic Forum meetings.
Okay, so when we go to Davos, after holding our own regional fora, when we go to Davos, let's take Africa for instance, what kind of things do we put forward to discuss?
Since it's basically a gathering of people of different interests, what tends to come out is that the region puts what it believes to be its own issues on the table. But you will see Africa doesn't meet together before going to the meeting. Everybody just goes to the meeting. So you will find different issues on the table. I mean, in Africa, you've got health issues. We've got infrastructure issues. We've got debt issues, debt management issues, and so on and so forth. So all of these issues receive a hearing at different fora, even within the World Economic Forum itself. So what tends to happen, therefore, is that depends on the degree of interest, whether as a group or on a bilateral basis, issues are picked up and followed through and pursued. Nigeria will probably come out with a list of contacts and interests groups or individuals, and then bring them home and work with those issues. Tanzania will do the same. And so the hunger, eradicate hunger issue that led to the agri program came from one of those. But the point is that we're all at different degrees of levels of maturity, and therefore capacity to actually follow through is also a major problem.
Sorry, may I ask Mr. Ali then? What Mr. Igbokwe just mentioned, you alluded to it in your submission just a few seconds ago. And there is a school of thought that a lot of this conversation, like he's just said, there is limited capacity for some African countries to take away from it and begin implementation or create strategy for implementation and eventual implementation. And there's also that same school of thought saying that it runs across the board around the world. There is conversation along the lines of the things that are needed, but in terms of making it come to fruition, the amount of success has been minimal. How true is that?
Well, I think there's a degree of truth in that. Certainly, going from ideas to implementation and finally through to having an achievement on the ground is quite difficult, and it is a problem that we see in Africa, and it's also a global problem. But I don't think that means that you shouldn't talk about the ideas, because if you don't have the ideas in the first place, there's nothing to implement. So you have to have the ideas first, then you have to think about how you can build the capacity for implementation. And again, these fora, and nothing is like a magic bullet that's going to solve all of the problems, and certainly these fora are not, but they are very useful events for bringing people together to share ideas, to network, and even the people who can help you implement some of those ideas or build your capacity to implement would also be at these events.
Okay, Mr. Igbokwe, so if we bring it back home and we're saying Nigeria is hosting World Economic Forum Africa, and we have this in May, from what we gathered, forging inclusive growth, creating jobs is supposed to be the key theme for this year's forum. Now, how do we begin to unbundle that and get some kind of result from it? When you look at it, maybe you want to take us through the statistics of unemployment and creation of jobs in Africa.
Well, I'll first of all confess that I have no idea about the genuine statistics for the unemployed, whether in Nigeria or the rest of Africa. But one thing is sure, we have a lot of unemployed youth. And it's not just in Nigeria, in the whole of Africa, and that's creating major social concern. I did some analysis about 6 months ago. Across West Africa, in each country in West Africa, about 63% of the population is under 25. 63% is under 25. And if you bring it home, ask yourself the question, a 25-year-old Nigerian, where is that person likely to be? For those who've been lucky enough to be in school, they're probably just about leaving school. So you just dial back and say to yourself, so what chances does that person have of being employed in Nigeria today? Just to give you an idea of what the problem really is. So you've got these people who are either not properly educated or educated but don't have a job. Okay. Put this together with the theme of the May gathering. I think governments and everybody else in the world recognize that unemployment, especially among the young, is a major problem. If you link that up with what's happening in Northern Africa, the sweeping changes in the economic landscape, and the problems that those events have caused, what you're going to see is a nervousness across the globe about Africa. So I think it's timely. But after all said and done, it is the responsibility of government in Nigeria, in the rest of Africa, to do something with the ideas, hopefully, that will come through the discussions.
Okay.
They have that responsibility. You cannot take that away from them.
Yes.
I'm not saying they didn't know they had that responsibility. They have been doing things. But to what extent are we going to have new ideas and new impetus to try to address the issue of unemployment? You cannot address unemployment issues without economic growth that percolates down to the grassroots. Because these 25 million people, people who are under 25 are at the grassroots level. So it's very, very clear to me that everybody recognizes that we have a problem and they're looking for answers from whatever quarter to try and address it.
So that brings me to the issue, Mr. Ali. Let's look very quickly at when you say forging inclusive growth, how do we turn that around into creating something that makes meaning to the man on the street when you say you're forging inclusive growth?
Well, firstly, what does inclusive growth mean? It's possible for the economy to grow, but for only a small section of society to benefit from that growth. That is non-inclusive growth. So inclusive growth is to make sure that the widest cross-section of society do actually benefit from the growth in the country. Now, Nigeria has actually done quite well in terms of economic growth over the last decade or so.
But has it been inclusive?
It has been inclusive to some extent.
But then we're talking of GDP that has not translated into creation of jobs at the rate that is expected and that has not seriously impacted on the real sector.
Well, that is true. Employment could be better, and the impact on the real sector could also be better. But I think that it's important to think about what the constraints are and how to remove those constraints. For example, the growth of the real sector, really one of the major constraints, and this is where, for example, the Africa Finance Corporation that I work for comes in, is around infrastructure. I mean, these statements have been repeated ad nauseum, but you cannot run a business in a country if you do not have steady power, steady water, steady security, if it's hard to take your goods to the market. And those are some of the constraints that are blocking the growth in the real sector. So some of the things that the government here has done, like the reforms that are taking place in the power sector, will have a positive impact on these.
How minimal, from your experience and knowledge of the terrain, the economic terrain in Nigeria, how minimal has been that growth? And what should be the level of growth when we're talking inclusive, that will take the real sector, that will look at the creation of job as well and take it to the next level?
The growth in Nigeria has been about 7%, which puts us, I believe, in as one of the top 10 fastest growing economies in the world. As you know, the gentleman who came up with the idea of BRICS has recently come up with the